Episode 396, Talented Miss Miller. Zeke couldn't resist and stood up while staring at the screen. Squeak! The meeting room door opened. Bessy slowly walked into the room. Everybody was staring at her. Looking down at the time on her phone, her red bracelet slid onto her white shirt sleeve. Frowning, she said, "It's 9:50 p.m. It's not time yet." In the staff office, after a silence of 1 minute, the shareholders all woke up. "Is it all done?" The fourth son had his gaze fixed on Bessy. Bessy pulled out the chair beside Zeke and sat down. Leaning back in the chair and with her legs crossed, she said, "It's almost done. You can let the teachers check." As she walked in, the teachers stared at her every move and did not look at the data on the screen. "Go let the 7 executives know, and also bring Director Miller along." The fourth son looked at his subordinates by his side and said while smirking, "My eldest niece is so capable that she can complete the system engineering test in 10 minutes. This was obviously not meant to praise Bessy. He knew how difficult the project was. This system engineering project was so difficult that even without a time limit, the technical engineering department might not be able to finish it. Bessy was excellent in all types of system engineering. She'd only taken 10 minutes to finish programming the first 2 codes. It was simply unrealistic to the fourth son. Although Bessy said she had finished, there were differences in the completion stages. There was a vast difference between 1% completion and 70% completion. The shareholders took turns looking at each other. It was unbelievable that Bessy only took 10 minutes to finish the system programming. "Zeke, let's take a look at their evaluation." Jack stood up and whispered to Zeke. He then walked out with the fourth son's subordinate. In the meeting room, Keith couldn't resist and asked softly with his head down, "Miss, have you really completed the project?" Bessy looked at her cell phone. She had sent a message to Michael, but had yet to receive a reply. She coughed and nodded absent-mindedly. The evaluation would take some time and required several senior executives to discuss business decisions. Afterward, the subsequent system programming needed to be looked over carefully and might take a long time. Bessy held up her phone and turned to face Zeke, asking, "Can I leave now?" As it was getting late, Zeke grabbed his jacket and said, "I'll walk you down." The two left the meeting room. The gazes of the shareholders and the fourth son were fixed on Zeke. Seeing her leave with him, the fourth son said mockingly, "Zeke, are you not waiting for the results? Who knows? Maybe my eldest niece can achieve a completion rate of 60%. Bessy had said that she took less than an hour to finish all the system programming. The shareholders did not want to leave. Although they didn't think Bessy would pass this election, they wanted to stay to hear the final results. It would take 85% to be successful, but no one from the Miller family had ever reached 50%. The shareholders did not take the fourth son's words seriously. "No, it's getting late." Zeke said his farewells to each of the shareholders and took Bessy downstairs. Across from the Millers' headquarters, a car was waiting. Marvin sat in the driver's seat while Patrick sat in the front passenger's seat. The light in the car was on. When Bessy and Zeke arrived, the two were still playing games. Marvin noticed their presence, threw his phone aside and got out of the car. Patrick lifted his head to say something, but saw Bessy and Zeke standing by the roadside. He also put down his phone and opened the door of the front passenger seat. Feeling uneasy, he looked at Marvin while getting out of the car. He had not sensed their presence. When did Marvin become so sensitive to his surroundings? Marvin did not say much. After Patrick greeted Bessy, he introduced himself to Zeke courteously. "Mr. Miller, I'm Patrick Clark." Zeke knew the 5 subordinates under Michael. His status in Evanston was comparable to the heir of other families. Nobody dared to provoke Michael in this industry, including his trusted partners. Especially Patrick, who was rumored to have the same status as Rosemary. This was the first time Zeke had met Marvin and Patrick since he had first heard of Michael. Before he thought about how to introduce himself properly, Patrick had already taken the initiative to greet him. The lights were dim, and Zeke's face could not be clearly seen. Bessy was fiddling with her phone and did not notice his expression. Looking around, she said, "We'll leave now then." Zeke nodded slightly and said, "Drive carefully." He stood in the same spot and watched the car disappear from his sight. Turning around, he looked at the Millers' headquarters with narrowed eyes. It took less than 10 minutes for Zeke to walk Bessy down. The results were still not announced when he went back to the meeting room. At the same time, the staff had found Director Miller in the technical department's office.
"Chairman Miller is leaving?"
Director Miller did not expect that Bessy could finish all the programming and that he would be needed for the evaluation. He stood up and looked at the time on his watch. It was 10:05 p.m. Director Miller grabbed his jacket hanging to the side. The staff sighed while shaking his head.
"No, Miss Miller took 50 minutes to finish the programming. We're waiting for you to evaluate it."
When Director Miller had left, he assumed that Bessy would be unable to finish, as she had spent too much time on the first computer. With her speed and remaining time, she might not even solve the code on the second computer. Hearing the staff say she had completed all the programming, Director Miller was stunned, and his heart raced. He threw his jacket on the table and walked out. In the workplace, the other 6 senior executives and Jack were waiting for him. As Director Miller sat at the evaluation computer and typed in a series of coded instructions, a white window popped up. He glanced briefly through the page and saw a green bar with 100% progress at the lower left corner. His pupils violently shook. After a long while, he finally spoke.
"Everyone, please assess your own portion."
Hearing the seriousness in his voice, the other senior executives quickly took their seats. They were discussing that Bessy might be a fluke. As they entered the editorial program, all of them had shocked expressions. The lively workplace instantly turned silent. Some of the senior executives were busy typing with their keyboards. 10 minutes later, they were all immersed in the codes. Jack stood beside Director Miller. Seeing him furiously typing, he did not dare to say anything, nor ask for the outcome. After half an hour, it was approaching 11 o'clock. All the staff were sitting in front of their computers and looking at the codes without speaking. This was taking too long. With the data available, even the hardest tests could be evaluated in 30 minutes. The shareholders in the meeting room were also feeling tired. The fourth son looked at them and patted his sleeves.
"It seems that the data is hard to decipher. Let's head to the workplace to find Director Miller."
Everyone agreed to his suggestion. The group of people entered the workspace. Some of the programmers were still immersed in the code.
"Director Miller."
The fourth son walked to his side without looking at the information on his computer.
"Let's not waste everyone's time if you cannot decipher the code.
With the fourth son's words, Director Miller came to his senses. He said seriously,
"Chairman Miller, did your niece really only take 10 minutes for every program? As there was a time limit, she might not have been serious with the test. I hope you will not be angry, Director Miller."
The fourth son laughed. Director Miller was elated.
"No, I'm not angry at all. Please don't mind me. I'm a little agitated. We were too excited about studying your niece's code and forgot to give you the evaluation results. Chairman Miller, please wait."
He minimized the code page and opened up the editor to type a series of codes. A black screen appeared. A series of numbers were shown on the screen.
"I can't believe she only took 10 minutes. I've never seen a talent like Miss Miller in my life,"
Director Miller said excitedly. All the data was shown on the screen as he concluded his words. WET2, 100% completion. AET3, 100% completion. VAT4, 100% completion. MAT5, 100% completion. KAT6, 100% completion. PAT7, 100% completion. Episode 397, a program from the Hacker Alliance. The workplace was spacious, but only a few standing beside Director Miller could see what was on his computer screen. Other than the fourth son, only Jack and a few shareholders were able to see the screen. The fourth son's smile instantly froze when he saw the numbers. He shoved the person standing in front of him out of the way in disbelief of the results. He tried to prevent Zeke from taking 10% of the shares and even abandoned Tanner. He thought that without Tucker, no one else in the Miller family would threaten his status. Who knew that Bessy would emerge out of nowhere? He had tried for a long time to secure this 10% of shares. In the end, he not only couldn't secure those shares, he now had to give up 8 more. The other shareholders were stunned.
It must be fake, right? Director Miller, did you make a mistake?
A 100% completion rate would be difficult to achieve even for the experts at the Miller Corporation. Previously, the fourth son had said that a 60% completion rate was already remarkable, but a 100% completion rate was simply unbelievable.
These are the results generated from all of our systems after the last update. I want to ask, how did Miss Miller achieve this?
Director Miller said while looking around, but did not spot Bessy.
Where is she?
The reactions from these people were very strange. Jack did not have good eyesight and could not see properly. Hearing Director Miller's words, his heart raced. He took 2 steps forward to read the words carefully. He stood rooted to the ground, staring at the results. Director Miller adjusted his screen back to its original position.
The business results are out too. Chairman Miller, please head to the meeting room for the final evaluation.
Everyone knew that even if Bessy scored 0 for the business decisions, she would still pass the selection.
Jack, what are you looking at? Why do you have such an expression? Does it mean that Miss Miller passed?
Keith asked hurriedly. Zeke stood by the side silently with his hands behind his back. Frowning, he asked,
Can you answer?
Jack's expression was frozen and his heart was racing. He turned to look at Zeke.
Not only did she pass, but she also achieved 100% completion for all 6 of the programming tasks.
Zeke was devastated. Keith's eyes opened wide and his legs gave way. He held onto the computer table for support. Ever since the elections were established, the difficulty of the test rose each year. It was an impossible task to complete. In the Miller family, many had taken the test in private but had only achieved at best a completion rate of 45%. Although they were only 15 or 16 years old, this showed the difficulty of the tests. If not, the fourth son wouldn't have called these elections. Unless he was truly crazy, how was 100% possible? This showed her unique talent for computing. This also meant that all of the senior executives and shareholders would approve of her being the successor. She would be gaining 18% of the shares. This was the agreement the patriarch had set for the successor. Even the Flake family couldn't help the fourth son change this agreement. Zeke's manager had previously told Jack that she was a genius in programming, but he did not expect her talents to be similar to her abilities in academics. The Miller family couldn't rest well due to Bessy's performance in the election. Jack recalled the events, and his hands started to tremble. He looked at Zeke and said,
Zeke, can the Miller family really go back to how it was before?
Jack was old and so only had this matter in mind. Keith suddenly stood upright. With dazzling eyes, he asked,
Jack, was the USB problem that guaranteed 5% of the shares also solved by Miss Miller?
The USB that was accidentally given to James was an unsolved case. Jack and Ricky had several theories but couldn't pinpoint who had done it. Jack even had to ask Mr. Rand if it was possible to solve the code. Mr. Rand had said it was impossible. It would be very difficult, even with his skills. Bessy was only a first-year student at Northwestern University. Thus, Jack did not expect her to know the code with such proficiency. Hearing Keith's words, Jack realized that person could be Bessy. Bessy didn't know that because of her election, the Miller family couldn't rest well today. She had already returned to the Highline apartments. On the way, Patrick briefly mentioned the matters of the head security guard. They stood by the side while Marvin parked the car. "I'm lost." Bessy pressed the elevator button, thought for a moment and narrowed her eyes.
"You must have offended someone with your bad temper."
She thought about it again and slowly began to speak. Austria was different from other places as it was dominated by several major forces. Other than Matthew, there were no fixed rules. Thus, no one dared to travel to Austria without a tourist agency. If someone went missing, they must have offended certain forces there.
"The head security guard has a bad temper. He has stayed at the Clark family in Evanston for too long and has forgotten his status."
Patrick nodded.
He naturally did not expect to offend someone in Austria.
Recalling this, Patrick frowned.
"Christopher is still finding out which force has taken him. Those people at the Clark family are unreliable, so Michael had to go."
Marvin was done parking the car and walked over. Hearing Patrick's words, and with the car keys in his hands, he said,
"Could it be the Moss family or the Underground Alliance?"
Marvin had stayed in Austria for half a year and knew these two forces. "The Mass family doesn't have any information," Bessy said. The elevator opened and Bessy walked in, but it's impossible for the Underground Alliance to do this.
"How do you know, Miss Miller?"
Marvin was shocked. Marvin had only briefly heard about the Underground Alliance. Christopher also did not have much information about them. In Austria, they were very secretive. Bessy looked at him and laughed. "I'm guessing." The elevator door opened and Bessy walked out. As she walked into the apartment, Patrick stopped Marvin and asked,
"I know about the Moss family. What's the Underground Alliance?"
Marvin just raised his head to look at him. Patrick really wanted to give him a good beating. Because Elijah had joined the ICNE project, its progress was faster than before. Elijah had helped Mr. Rostron at the Research Institute for many years. He was more knowledgeable and experienced than this Kara. The four of them discussed the project in school whenever they were bored. Mr. Rostron knew that Elijah had joined the ICNE project and did not ask for him much. This way, Bessy had less to do in a day. The next day was a Friday. At 5 p.m., Bessy went to the hospital to visit Tucker. Since Bessy's election was finished, Zeke was taking the 8 p.m. flight to Austria. He had come to the hospital to bid farewell to Tucker. Bessy opened the door. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Zeke, Jack, James, Mr. Rand, Zeke's manager. They had heard Jack and Keith's descriptions of Bessy's abilities. The 18% shares from the fourth son were successfully transferred to her, but Bessy had transferred them to Zeke.
"Miss!"
Jack quickly turned and placed a chair beside the bed, behaving even more respectfully than before. Bessy shook her head. "There's no need. I have to leave soon to settle some matters." She walked straight to Tucker's bedside and flipped open the hospital charts. Tucker's condition was much better than before. Bessy asked Zeke, "Are you leaving tonight?" Zeke regained his composure and said,
"Yes, I'm leaving after this."
He lowered his head and thought for a moment before nagging at Bessy again. His concerns were all about her lifestyle habits. The manager looked at his phone and said,
"Zeke, we should go."
He had notified Jack yesterday that they were leaving. He bid farewell to those in the room and left holding his mask. Bessy and Jack walked him out. Keith, Ricky, and the others in the room had their gazes fixed on Bessy and did not say a word. Mr. Rand sat by Tucker's bedside. Seeing Bessy's shadow slowly fade, he looked at the energetic Tucker and said,
"You've recovered too quickly."
His cell phone buzzed as he spoke. Mr. Rand looked at his phone. There was a message that said, "Verification was completed." It was a program from the Hacker Alliance. Episode 398. My father is the chairman of the Hacker Alliance. After this, another message was immediately sent.
"I heard that it's for the boss's self-entertainment and not for sale. Where did you find it? Can you show it to me?" It's because Daniel gave me the experimental drugs, Tucker replied in response to Mr. Rand's earlier question. He was very respectful to Mr. Rand. He paused, then replied, I've heard that Michael's operation was also very successful. Tucker noticed Mr. Rand was staring at his phone in a daze. Teacher, are you okay? Tucker hesitated, but nudged him. Mr. Rand was startled. However, remembering Tucker had a craniotomy, he did not want to frighten him. Tucker, did your sister give you that black book? Mr. Rand held onto the bed with both hands. Tucker squinted his eyes, recalling which books Mr. Rand was talking about. He replied, Yes, most of my books were given to me by my sister. Mr. Rand did not finish listening to his reply. He sprung up from his chair. Without any explanation, he opened the door and left. What's with Mr. Rand? Keith waited for them all to return to their senses and stared blankly in Mr. Rand's direction. Tucker squinted slightly. The black book contained many high-level codes, and he enjoyed it very much. Bessy typically gave him obscure books, so Tucker didn't know that he was reading a famous book. Also, the way she delivered the books was really casual. Seeing Mr. Rand's expression, though, Tucker realized that Bessy had not given him an ordinary book. Tucker frowned. He lifted his head to look at Ricky, then shifted his gaze to Keith. Mr. Marino, could you lock all my books in the cabinet later tonight? Lock up all the books? What was with this weird request? Keith did not reject him, though. He nodded and said, Yes, I will. Mr. Rand was slower than Bessy. When Bessy and Zeke had reached the first floor, he had only reached the elevator. But Zeke's car was parked right outside the hospital. At this moment, he was still talking to Bessy by the roadside. It was getting dark, approaching 5:30 p.m. Before Zeke could get into the car with Bessy, Mr. Rand shouted, Mr. Miller, wait! He ran up to them, panting. Zeke was surprised. Mr. Rand, what's wrong? Mr. Rand nodded and turned to Bessy. Sorry for my impoliteness, but how did you have the Hacker Alliance's programming book? Just then, the street lights lit up. Bessy's face was visible in the light. Hearing this, she turned and said calmly, Do you mean that black book? Mr. Rand nodded vigorously. Zeke's manager heard Mr. Rand's words from where he was standing to the side. The manager was stunned. What's the Hacker Alliance's programming book? It's a programming book from the Hacker Alliance. It was written by the Hacker Alliance. It's not for sale, and only internal members have access to it. Mr. Rand explained to the manager, but his gaze did not leave Bessy. Hearing his explanation, the manager was even more shocked. Does the Hacker Alliance really exist? The manager grabbed Mr. Rand's shoulders and said excitedly, Does this mean that the commotion on the internet about Hacker B is true? They're not rumors? To ordinary people, the Hacker Alliance was like a legend. The rumors on the internet hadn't been proven by anybody. Mr. Rand finally turned to look at the manager. Of course they're not rumors. Bessy, how did you get a hold of the Hacker Alliance programming book? The manager asked Bessy excitedly. Bessy looked at the manager and Mr. Rand. She hesitated for a few seconds before smiling and saying, I don't know. My neighbor bought it from somewhere and gave it to me, and I then gave it to Tucker. Her expression and tone were calm. It did not seem that she was lying. Her straight face was very convincing. The manager and Mr. Rand believed her. Zeke stood by the side silently, without saying a word. Mr. Rand said a few words to Bessy and then bade them farewell. In Zeke's huge fan, the manager couldn't help but sigh. The Hacker Alliance actually exists. How did your niece's neighbor get a hold of that book? Meanwhile, Bessy also got in the car. Marvin drove while Bessy sat in the back seat. She took out her phone to message her neighbor. She wasn't lying. She didn't know that the book was only available to internal members of the Hacker Alliance, but she knew that it was written by them, since it wasn't sold to the public. So why did Mr. Cheatham have it? Bessy thought for a while and sent a message. What's your relationship with the Hacker Alliance? She remembered her neighbor saying that he didn't like the Hacker Alliance and thus did not join them. As for Bessy,
The Hacker Alliance had invited her to join them multiple times. She had also been invited to join under her other identity. Her neighbor seemed to be busy and did not reply. As Marvin drove the car to the underground car park, her neighbor called.
"Why did you ask me this question?"
It was quiet on the 28th floor where Mr. Cheatham was. He saw two candidates nearby and then walked into the meeting room with his phone in his hand. His tone was flat and straightforward. His staff poured him a cup of tea. It was made of 7 tea leaves. He looked down and took a sip. Bessy got out of the car with her backpack. She was careless and did not wear a scarf. "I'm just curious. You're not a member of the Hacker Alliance, so how could you still invite me to join them?"
"It's nothing."
Mr. Cheatham put the teacup down on the table. As Bessy had not asked previously, he had not explained much. Since she asked now, he had nothing to hide. Afraid that she might get involved with the Hacker Alliance, he said,
"My father is the Hacker Alliance's chairman. Not many people know about this. He hasn't found the right person to inherit his position."
Episode 399, 129 pages. Mr. Cheatham's voice was warm and calm. Bessy was speechless. It had seemed weird when Mr. Cheatham recruited her previously. She didn't know that members could join the Hacker Alliance without a referral. But if Mr. Cheatham was the Hacker Alliance's chairman's son, everything now made sense. They hung up. Mr. Cheatham took the teacup and walked towards the lounge. Before he walked out, he received a call from Austria. He glanced at his phone and immediately picked up the call. With his usual tone, he said, "Dad." It was 1 a.m. in Austria. The older man on the phone was dressed in a nightgown with wrinkles on his face. His eyes were cloudy and he was thin. He was holding on to the newly released appraisal.
"Are you in Evanston right now, Emmanuel?"
His face was solemn. Emmanuel went to the lounge. Standing beside the window, he replied,
"Yes."
Emmanuel was laconic and didn't seem himself. His father nodded and said,
"I know your aunt's whereabouts. She has some children in Evanston."
"My aunt?"
Emmanuel nodded slightly. From what he could remember, he had never seen his long-lost aunt. His reaction was cold. His father frowned. He wanted Emmanuel to attend to this matter, but there were still many appraisals left unpublished. Knowing Emmanuel's personality, it was difficult to get him to work.
"It's okay. I will investigate this matter myself."
His father hung up. He couldn't wait, so he took his jacket and was about to leave. The men standing outside looked at him and said,
"Sir, we're not fully prepared, and won't you scare them if you go back like this?"
"Yes, you're right."
Emmanuel's father nodded and turned back restlessly.
"I wonder what my sister's children look like. Did the Bright family send any pictures over?"
He asked Evanston to send some information over. He also ordered some men to investigate his sister's children. The Bright family quickly sent over information on James. At the Bright family's house, Samuel's mother was sitting on the sofa with her legs raised. She was playing a game when she received a phone call. She saw that the call was from Austria and picked it up immediately. She stood up from the sofa and walked outside with a serious expression. Samuel, who had just come home, frowned in confusion upon seeing his mother's expression. He thought it must be a call from his great aunt. He had never seen such an expression on his arrogant mom's face except for when she spoke to her great aunt. A few minutes later, Samuel's mother returned with a complex expression. Samuel lay on the sofa. Seeing his mom's expression, he asked,
"Mom, what's the matter?" "It's nothing."
She looked at him and walked towards the sofa slowly. Thinking, she said,
"I might have offended Bessy's father."
But then she remembered that Samuel might betray her. Samuel's mother glanced at him and did not mention it again.
"How's Tucker's condition?"
she asked.
"With Michael there, nothing will happen,"
Samuel said calmly. He stood up and went downstairs. With the DNA results from Bessy's hair, James and Tucker were basically recognized. The plan must happen without fail. No matter what, the great-aunt's relatives would come back, including their great-uncle. Samuel's mother frowned. Evanston's peace might be ruined. She should settle the matters before her great-uncle and the others were back. Back in Evanston, Bessy had arrived home. In the living room, Rosemary was sitting on the sofa wearing a serious expression.
"Where did Michael go?"
she asked and sighed. Patrick poured her a cup of tea.
"There's some information, but we're facing a bit of trouble."
Rosemary lifted her head.
"What trouble? Erin is looking for Sherry. She has found some information, too. Christopher said Michael and the forces in Austria."
Patrick's lips twitched as he said this. He didn't dare to say that they had grudges for fear of scaring Rosemary. Austria was originally established by a few superior forces. When Michael was young, he unknowingly provoked these forces. As they spoke, they heard a sound from the door. Rosemary immediately stopped talking. Bessy entered after taking off her shoes. Rosemary's expressions changed. She fixed her shawl and walked towards the dining table with a calm expression.
"Bessy, you're back."
She then asked the kitchen to start serving dinner. Rosemary was busy these 2 days. She had to worry about work, Sergeant Wilder, and Michael's situation in Austria. She knew that Michael wasn't around, and so she intentionally came over to visit with Bessy after work. She didn't want her to worry about this complicated matter and did not mention it to her. But she didn't know that Patrick had already told Bessy about this. Bessy set aside her scarf and jacket, then walked towards the dining table and sat down. "Are you busy these days?" Rosemary looked exhausted. Before she could speak, Patrick said,
"Your sister has been worrying about the matter with Michael in Austria."
Rosemary hadn't thought of a way to reveal it to Bessy. How could Patrick do it so easily? Bessy held the teacup that Marvin had brought over, smiled, and said, "Don't worry, nothing will happen." The manor on the other side of Austria was quite influential. Austria was divided into a few parts by other forces. They didn't know what had happened to the security guard, but it was for sure that nothing bad would happen. Information about Austria wasn't readily available to the people in Evanston. Rosemary thought that Bessy would be worried when she knew about this. She didn't expect her to be so calm. This was unfitting with her image. While she was thinking, Bessy placed some vegetables into her bowl. "Rosemary, please eat." Rosemary came to her senses. She picked up her fork and ate the vegetables. After eating, Rosemary spent the night in the guest room. She bathed and switched on the computer she had brought from the office. Pondering, she took out her cell phone. Sherry had sent over a few website links on Twitter. Rosemary stared at the links for a few seconds before replying to her with a "thank you." She browsed the links on her computer and quickly entered a Black forum. There were exactly 129 pages. She wasn't a member and could only set up a normal account with her phone number. She was looking for the membership's payment process. Before she was done searching, someone knocked on her door. It was Bessy. She was holding 2 glasses of milk, one for herself and one for Rosemary. Rosemary opened the door to let her in. "You're not busy today? We have a new team member on our team, so I'm not too busy." Bessy's gaze stopped at her computer screen showing the payment page. Rosemary nodded and took a sip of the milk. Seeing Bessy's attention on her computer, she said, "It has 129 pages. You must be curious. I'll send them to you later." The 129 pages contained only individual links unable to be searched for on the internet. It required a special search engine and codes. "No need." Bessy drank her milk and pondered. "Are you purchasing the membership? Let me help you." "Do you know how to? The process is written on the website." Before she could continue, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and saw that the call was from Joshua. Since he was calling at this hour, he must want to discuss Sergeant Wilder's situation in Austria. Rosemary looked at Bessy. She didn't know what Joshua wanted to speak to her about. so she left the room to pick up the call. Bessy sat on the stool in front of the computer and started typing. 3 minutes later, Rosemary had finished speaking on the phone. She gathered herself together and went back to the room. Standing up from the chair, Bessy's fingertips moved away from the keyboard. "Rosemary, I've set it up for you. Please get some sleep." Rosemary saw her out. When she returned to her computer, she was stunned. Episode 400, Star Level Authorization by Admin Lone Wolf. There was just one word on the web page. Success. Was Bessy successful in the order? Was it supposed to be this simple? Rosemary checked the instructions on the Word document. However, the instructions had a different image of a successful order as compared to what she was seeing. She wanted to ask Bessy for help with it, but Bessy had been really quick in completing the task. She had only spoken to Joshua for a couple of minutes, and within that time, Bessy was done. Rosemary gripped the mouse as she tried to understand the web page, but she was unsuccessful. She closed it eventually. She also sent a message to Michael that Bessy had returned home early today. Meanwhile, Bessy had logged into her social media accounts the moment she got back to her room, and saw she received research data from Elijah and Kara. The ICNE competition was supposed to be held in the second week of February. This meant she only had a month left. Principal White had also mentioned that he would be choosing his successor in March. Her thesis on the underground reactor and SDI paper were on par with those produced by the Research Institute. Hence, the competition in February wasn't that crucial to her application to the Research Institute anymore. However, the ICNE competition would be crucial to her if she wanted to be considered as Principal White's successor. This was because the competition was held on an international scale, so doing well in the competition carried a lot more weight. Bessy recalled Principal White mentioning that none of the national youth teams had gotten into the top 30 in the competition before. Hence, if she could get that, it would be great for both Northwestern University and the physics laboratories across the country. So this competition was quite a challenge for Bessy. As she thought about the competition, she received a message. It was from Christopher. "Miss Miller, are you available?" She looked at it in confusion. Christopher knew her well enough already and initiated a video call with her. Bessy tidied up her pajamas and accepted the invitation. She then stood up and switched on the light. "Miss Miller." It was already 4 a.m. in Austria. Bessy wasn't sure if Christopher had just gotten up or simply hadn't slept. As he was standing by the side of a road, she couldn't make out his surroundings. Bessy sat back down in the chair. She then propped her phone next to her cup of milk and asked, "What's the matter?" "You haven't forgotten about Matthew and the Moss family, right?" Christopher replied after thinking for a moment. Bessy replied with a nod, which was a signal for him to continue. "We've investigated him in Austria. The security guard and his gang are all in jail at the moment. However, we're not sure who was involved in it. The main point is that..." Christopher continued carefully after he made sure there wasn't anyone eavesdropping on him. "The boss created huge trouble when he left for Austria earlier this year. The Moss family and the Underground Alliance had one of their divisions destroyed by him. Their anger should have subsided after this long. However, the boss didn't seem keen on keeping a low profile when he returned this time." Austria had quite a few powerful families. However, Michael wasn't afraid of any of them. But if he were to carry on this way, the Moss family would definitely team up with the other families of the Underground Alliance against them. Christopher was put in a spot. "When will you be available to come to Austria?" Christopher asked. He recalled that when Bessy was there previously, Michael had kept a low profile. After listening to his proposition, Bessy leaned back in her chair with her arms crossed. She frowned as she looked at him and asked, "How could they have the audacity to team up against us?" Christopher was speechless. He suddenly had a premonition that things would get worse if Bessy came. Christopher shook his head as he attempted to keep that thought out of his mind. He then briefed her on the movements of the forces there. Bessy continued to lean in her chair as she thought. She then replied, "Let me finish up on my next assignment and my work in the laboratory. I should be available on the day after tomorrow." "All right," Christopher replied as he pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses. He seemed relieved. They hung up. Bessy closed the files regarding the ICNE competition and sent Jared a message after thinking for a while. Jared replied with a file after half an hour. It was regarding an incident that occurred at the start of the year. Jared followed the file with a message.
You're heading to Austria again?
Bessy sat up as she looked at the document. She then replied, yes. She didn't like to write long essays for her replies. Jared responded,
Weren't you there 2 years ago?
Bessy stopped replying. On the other end of the phone, Jared raised his head and looked at Slag Dragon. He then said,
I recall receiving a phone call from Austria on my personal phone 2 years ago. I was never successful in finding out the source of the call.
All Jared remembered was that the person who called was a female who sounded really sad. She must have made a mistake as she hung up immediately when he spoke. He previously couldn't find the source. The number had stopped operating after a couple of days. Jared's personal number was only known by the team members. At that time, he had thought that Lone Wolf was a guy, and it did not sound like the voice of the only female on the team, Clarissa. Jared gave up after he couldn't get any results. As he noticed that Bessy was searching for news about Austria, it reminded him of this past matter.
Was it Lone Wolf?
Slag Dragon asked. He was wearing a pair of flip-flops and a denim jacket. He opened a can of beer and continued.
But isn't she quite familiar with Austria? Why is she asking that from you all of a sudden? What's she planning to do with that information? What happened there? Send me a copy of the file too, boss.
Slag Dragon continued after pausing to drink the beer.
She has provided information about Austria all this while. She became so distant from us after disappearing for a year. If it wasn't for her grandma, we would have never seen her again.
Jared stood up and headed upstairs. Slag Dragon crushed the can of beer and asked,
Boss, why are you leaving?
As he started to follow Jared, a message popped up from his personal account. It was Giant Crocodile.
Quickly, send me an order from your account.
Giant Crocodile immediately followed up with an order number. What was going on? Slag Dragon immediately forwarded the order to him. Slag Dragon had to know what was going on, so he called Giant Crocodile.
Bro, what's the matter with you? Are you going to start being secretive like Lone Wolf? Oh.
Giant Crocodile replied coldly after making sure that Slag Dragon's call had no issue.
Clarissa told me that this order was recommended by my big bro.
He then immediately hung up the call. Slag Dragon was shocked. He immediately opened his account and checked his order records. He found a new entry in the records. Client, Clark, star level permission, order information attached. The star level permissions could only be done by the 5 members, but it wasn't something that Giant Crocodile or Jared would do. Only Clarissa had set a star level authorization for the past few months. Slag Dragon had the highest level of permission. Hence, he could check the person that set the star level authorization. He then clicked on it. Star level authorizer, Lone Wolf. Slag Dragon was speechless. He got back to his desktop and clicked on the group.
At Giant Crocodile, you son of a bitch, come fight me.
Morningbird replied to his message. Don't delete this message if you're a real man. The next second, Slag Dragon deleted a message. The next afternoon, the managing members of the Clark family were gathered somberly in the living room of the Clark family house. The Clark family had planned for their entry into the Austrian market for almost half a year. However, no one expected that the security guard and gang would lose contact with them the moment they got there. Joshua was in the center seat. Rosemary was seated on the first seat to the right. Aaron's seat was the first seat to the left, but he wasn't there yet. The other managing members of the family were discussing the matter. Aaron finally arrived. There was someone following after him. Someone recognized her, stood up, and greeted her with surprise.
Miss Blake?
Sherry was wearing a white fur coat. She stood beside the table and greeted everyone. Mr. Clark, Miss Clark, managers. Aaron got a chair for her. I've heard all about this. Sherry sat down. She then looked at Joshua and spoke gently. Just let me know if you need anything. Aaron nodded and said,
Miss Blake is really busy, but she contacted me after she heard about the matter. We're glad to have your help.
The managers replied smilingly. They could finally find out what happened in Austria. Most were surprised by her sudden arrival. However, Joshua didn't acknowledge her presence. He even frowned as he saw her. Everyone could tell that Sherry still had feelings for Michael. If it wasn't for Bessy, Joshua would have accepted Sherry's help already. He took a sip from his cup of tea and continued to ignore Sherry's presence. Rosemary was on the other side of the table. After greeting Sherry, she kept to herself and looked down at her phone. She had downloaded the 129 app from the web page yesterday. She casually clicked on it and saw an update. Episode 401. Is recipient giant crocodile? Someone had accepted her order? Rosemary was slightly stunned. She remembered Samuel and Marvin saying that it was rare for 129 to take anyone's orders. She didn't know what to think now. Rosemary opened the notification. Recipient, giant crocodile. Her hands shook. She took a sip of tea and then closed her eyes for a moment, before checking the details again. It was the same. Recipient, giant crocodile. Rosemary shifted her chair back with a screech. It was so loud that everyone in the hall turned to look at her. Aaron hadn't been doing too well in the Clark family recently, as the majority of them were more inclined to support Michael. He looked at Rosemary and asked a little unpleasantly, "What's with you?" "Dad." She ignored him and turned to Joshua. "I'm going to Austria tomorrow." Joshua rejected this idea right away.
No, don't follow in the footsteps of your little brother.
It was bad enough that Michael had gone away, even though he still checked in often. If Rosemary left, Joshua would go bald from the stress. Rosemary put on her jacket and straightened up. "Giant crocodile from 129 will help me."
Giant crocodile isn't even.
Joshua instinctively started to object, but something suddenly came to mind, and he looked up with bright eyes.
Who did you say again?
Even Sherry turned around. "Miss Clark, giant crocodile hasn't been involved in 129 matters for months. He seems to have gone completely offline." "I don't know, but that's what I saw on my cell phone." Rosemary slowly raised her cell phone under everyone's watchful eyes. Sherry took the cell phone over and scrutinized it. She didn't scroll further. She just kept her eyes on this page. It said enough. It really was the official 129 app, and it really was a notification from Giant Crocodile. "But I've got to thank you for sending me the link address last night," Rosemary told her. Sherry shook her head. She seemed calm, but her heart wasn't. She couldn't figure out why this senior member, who'd almost retired from the scene, would take up this order. What was so different about this order? Everyone in the Clark family had their eyes on Rosemary because of this order. After all, Giant Crocodile was one of the 5 founding members of 129. The heavy atmosphere lightened up quite a bit. Those who had been focused on Sherry before this, including Aaron, shifted their focus to Rosemary. Joshua stood up and walked towards her.
"You're..."
Rosemary thought about Bessy and then shook her head. "I'll tell you more when I'm done with my inquiry."
"Since when did you have anything to do with 129?
Aaron asked, turning to Rosemary. He seemed anxious. She kept her chin rested on her hand and remained silent for fear of angering Aaron. Aaron glanced at his subordinate.
Who has she been meeting recently? Besides Miss Miller, Miss Clark hasn't been meeting anyone else."
The subordinate paused for a while before saying,
"On that note, that Miss Miller..."
He was about to say that there was something fishy about her. Aaron didn't want to hear about Bessy anymore. Because of her, the security guard had suddenly chosen to be on Michael's side, because his daughter was a fan. He had never thought that the security guard would take this as a child's game.
"All right, you can go."
Aaron waved him away. The subordinate bowed and took his leave. On the other side, Bessy had a gathering at the university that evening with Elijah, Kara, and the others. Last night, she had written down the individual strategic progressions, and now she delegated the tasks among them. Elijah had joined them a little late and decided to take up a few more on his own to not take advantage of the rest. Bessy could tell what he was thinking and decided that it was within his ability to complete them. So she didn't say much. If she didn't allow him to take on these tasks, he'd feel even more pressurized. Having passed along the information and given the relevant instructions, Bessy gave Patrick a call to arrange for a trip to Austria. She knew that Patrick would be better at arranging the flight tickets and itineraries than she would, especially now that it was peak winter season. It was hard to get plane tickets. Patrick was shocked to hear from her.
Miss Miller, you're going to Austria too? Miss Clark just told me about it this afternoon. Hold on, I'll send both of your information to Christopher. The both of you can head over together tomorrow.
The flight was at 9:40 in the morning the following day. Bessy didn't ask him to tell Michael that she was going along. When she arrived at the airport, Rosemary was already waiting with her luggage. Marvin came with Bessy, who also intended to go to Austria.
Marvin, where did you get the tickets from?
Rosemary was in a black blazer and appeared rather serious but stylish.
Secretary Peterson told me last night that they were out of tickets.
Marvin responded expressionlessly.
Got it on the app.
Rosemary was speechless. The three of them checked in and boarded the plane. They happened to be sitting in the same row in the business class cabin. After getting seated, Rosemary took off her blazer and turned to Bessy.
Bessy, how did you place my order last night?
She wasn't clueless. Given Sherry's reaction and the name Giant Crocodile, the order shouldn't have been taken up so quickly, especially by a senior member. The only factor that could have changed things was Bessy. After the plane had taken off, Bessy turned on her laptop and looked through the IC&E lab analysis. Upon hearing Rosemary's question, she took off one side of her earphones. She thought about it for a while before saying to her, "I placed it on the web page." Rosemary was speechless. Now she knew why Marvin had been so hard to deal with recently. Bessy did not say much, but her reaction gave Rosemary an idea of the situation. It must have had something to do with her. Rosemary took a deep breath. If it wasn't for the fact that they were up in the sky, she would have turned her cell phone on. They arrived in Austria at about 4 in the afternoon. Christopher was standing at the entrance in a black suit. Rosemary did not see him. She looked down and took out her cell phone. Episode 402. A Giant Power in Austria. There were many people at the airport, and it was rather loud with conversations. Rosemary already changed her SIM card before she boarded the plane. She was now giving Joshua a call. Joshua picked up the call quickly.
"You've arrived?"
He was standing in the long hallway, playing with his parrot.
We just got off the plane.
Rosemary walked slowly and kept her eyes in front of her, where she could see Christopher speaking to Bessy. Joshua nodded.
"Did you see your brother?"
He didn't come.
Rosemary found it strange. She scanned the surroundings but did not see Michael. She lowered her voice and said,
"Dad, I wanted to tell you about the order yesterday."
Rosemary continued watching Bessy. Joshua suddenly put the bird's feet aside and turned to face the end of the hallway. Rosemary continued talking.
Bessy was behind all of it last night. Although she didn't say it, I'm pretty sure it has something to do with her.
Rosemary couldn't guess how exactly she had a hand in it. Did Bessy know Giant Crocodile? Was she one of the members of 129? The orders were picked solely based on the interests of the older members in 129. Rosemary had heard that the person with the code name Morningbird could reject an order worth $1 million and accept one that was worth only $5,000 instead. Joshua was deep in thought.
"Joshua."
Simons furrowed his brows.
"Michael and the rest."
"Bessy and Rosemary have gone to Austria together."
Joshua turned around. He then said a little incredulously,
"Rosemary says that the giant crocodile case might have something to do with Bessy."
Although this was just her speculation, the fact that Rosemary would share it with him meant that she was pretty sure. Back in Austria, on the tarmac, Christopher finished talking with Bessy about the general matters. He turned towards Rosemary and greeted her.
"Miss Clark."
Rosemary looked at him, seemingly a little shocked. She hadn't really seen Christopher much before. Besides bumping into him a few years ago at their old hometown, she didn't remember meeting him.
Christopher, you've been in Austria this whole time?
A line of people were finding their way out of the tarmac. A black car was parked nearby. Rosemary knew that Christopher was under Michael, but that Christopher had never really cared about the Clark family matters. It had been so many years, and Rosemary never actually knew where he had been. She saw how familiar Christopher was with this place as he led the way. Rosemary guessed that he had been in Austria for quite a while by now.
I've stayed here for a while.
Christopher was always gentle and calm as he spoke. Austria was a messy place, and those who dared to walk around alone were usually not to be trifled with. The people around them, whether they were in a group or walking alone, were avoiding Christopher and the people with him. Marvin appeared rather calm, and Rosemary, having spent a long time in Evanston, didn't notice anything at this point. They walked to the car and Rosemary saw a small black flag hanging on the left-hand mirror. Christopher started the car with Marvin in the front passenger seat. Bessy and Rosemary took the back seat. Rosemary was looking out the car window. The landing area here wasn't quite like the one in Evanston. Rosemary could see tall, old buildings in the distance. Before arriving, she'd also checked out some information on Austria and guessed that those were probably the auction and black market areas. Evanston had those too, but they were a lot more low profile there. Rosemary would go to the auctions every month, though. In the corner of her eye, she saw Bessy open her haversack and take out some documents. Rosemary turned around and saw the first line was full of confusing words. The refraction of ray Y under. She didn't bother looking any longer. Christopher didn't take the longer route this time. He parked the car in front of a villa. Marvin unbuckled his seatbelt and looked out.
This is it?
He wasn't familiar with the place. He was still waiting to see Rosemary get a shock from seeing Michael's base. Rosemary and Bessy got out of the car. Bessy wrapped her scarf around her neck, looked at a skyscraper a few streets away and said, "That's Interpol's headquarters." Marvin nodded.
Oh.
Christopher, who had been about to explain this, turned to look at her in some shock.
You're right. Boss will be spending all his time here for his trip to Austria.
The stronger powers in Austria all stayed in their own lane. This was Matthew's territory of control, so Christopher and the rest wouldn't usually be around here. In the 6 months that Bessy had come previously, no one had taken her here. They were spending all of their time in the area under Christopher's control. So Marvin had no idea where this place was. But Bessy seemed rather familiar with the vicinity. Bessy picked up her bag and looked at Christopher. "You think the security guard and the rest have been caught by them?"
"That's right."
Christopher pushed his previous thoughts aside as more important matters took over. He led them in while saying,
"Based on what we found, it's likely Matthew."
"Matthew?" Bessy stopped in her tracks. She looked at him. Rosemary had been scanning the surroundings. Upon hearing about the security guards, she came closer and asked seriously,
"Who's this Matthew person?" "An international police officer,"
Christopher explained to her.
"The person in the highest power in that building you saw just now. Also, one of the greatest powers in Austria."
Rosemary had no idea who Matthew was, but she'd looked up relevant stuff before. She pretty much understood what Christopher was saying.
Their place in Austria is the equivalent to the top 4 households in Evanston.
Rosemary seemed even clearer about the picture now.
Why is the security guard being held by them?
She had thought that the security guard and the rest had accidentally offended a small group of people. After all, the people with security guards weren't exactly impressive or eye-catching in Austria. Who knew that their captor was actually Matthew, one of Austria's giant powers? Episode 403, A Force Not to be Messed with. Rosemary's heart sank a little. This situation was worse than she expected. Internationally recognized names like Matthew were very distant to Rosemary. To her, they were almost like legends of the past, she would never get to meet. She was too far from Matthew's league. She felt as if her heart had been hit. Hearing that the security guard and the rest had gotten into trouble with people like Matthew, Rosemary simply couldn't keep her composure.
Come on in first.
Christopher led them inside calmly.
We don't know the details yet. We'll only find out when we meet the head security guard.
Outside the villa were dirt roads and cobblestone paths, and the whole area was extremely quiet. Christopher opened the main door and let them enter first.
Boss and the rest are out today. They'll probably be back at night.
Bessy hadn't said much the entire journey, not even when she heard Matthew's name. She put her bag down and looked at Christopher. It was pretty obvious that Bessy wasn't feeling her best. Christopher took her to the second floor and said,
The bedroom inside the study on the second floor is yours. Come with me first. No need to change out of your shoes.
There were no carpets or rugs inside. It was all marble flooring. Although Bessy hadn't been with him at the time, Christopher had left a room for her when he was preparing the place. The main color theme was white and blue. Although her bedroom here wasn't as big as the one in the manor, there was everything she needed. And the air conditioner was set at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Rosemary did not bring up Matthew's name again.
Bessy, take a rest first.
Bessy gave her a polite nod before heading into the room. Only after Bessy went in did Christopher take Rosemary to her room on the third floor. Marvin carried Rosemary's luggage up behind them. It seemed so light when he carried it. Rosemary asked,
Marvin, why did Bessy suddenly come to Austria? She seems so busy.
She had barely rested at all the whole day.
I was the one who asked Miss Miller to be here.
Christopher responded right away.
With the boss's situation here, I don't feel too safe about it without Miss Miller around. What is it that you need Bessy for specifically? Isn't it better to give her peace and time to work on her own research?
Rosemary hadn't thought about why Christopher got Bessy here. When she entered the room, she got more serious and got down to business.
Now that I'm in Austria, Giant Crocodile will provide me with all the help and information we need.
That was why she had come to Austria. Christopher had always remained calm, but now he seemed a little surprised.
Are you sure it's Giant Crocodile?
Yes. Rosemary took her cell phone out and showed him the page. Christopher took it and saw Giant Crocodile's logo right away.
It really is him. But I heard that with the new members in 129, the senior ones hardly step forward to take up orders anymore. Miss Clark, how did you? It's a long story.
I actually didn't do anything. Rosemary thought for a bit and decided there was nothing to hide.
But I think it had something to do with Bessy. Miss Miller?
He looked at her.
129 has a lot of connections, especially Morningbird and Lone Wolf. With Giant Crocodile's help, at least we can rest assured that Matthew dares not do too much to us.
Although he said this, Christopher was still thinking about what had happened the last time. Giant Crocodile was enemies with Alexander. Christopher rubbed his temple. Michael had offended too many people.
Marvin, is Mr. Brown still in Evanston?
Christopher asked.
Matthew helped Daniel a few times. They should know each other quite well. If we can get him to negotiate with Matthew, that'd be best.
As for Michael, Christopher had given up. Marvin nodded and took out his cell phone.
I can contact Mr. Brown. Ask him briefly first.
Christopher looked at the time.
We'll discuss the details when the boss is back.
On the second floor, in Bessy's bedroom, she didn't rest right after Rosemary and the others left. Instead, she took her laptop out of her bag and placed it on the table. The laptop turned on by itself. A document appeared on the screen. Bessy did not look at it. She simply closed it, revealing only the plain sandy-colored desktop. Her laptop screen was either the warm but oppressing color of the sand, or the vast ocean view. It depended on her mood. After looking at the screen for a moment, Bessy took her cell phone out and scrolled it for a while. Christopher had decorated the room according to her taste. Bessy got a cup of water and opened a coding sequence on her cell phone. She made a call with the code. It took some time for the information to be translated and for the call to be made. Bessy sat back in her chair and put on her earphones, then turned on the voice changer. The other party picked up the call. It was a middle-aged voice. The person sounded shocked.
You actually took the initiative to call me?
Matthew was always the one who contacted her first. This was the first time the roles were flipped, which shocked him. Everyone in the triad knew that he had a loyal hacker who created cases for him quietly, but only Matthew himself knew that he had never even met the hacker in person before. He only knew that this hacker was known as B, and B was a rather renowned, albeit anonymous, figure in the hacking world. A few times he had even invited Hacker B to crack cases and arrest people with him. After all, a good hacker was a good helper. But Hacker B had rejected him more than once. Now, Matthew excitedly asked,
"Do you want to join our organization?"
Bessy hesitated and then said, "No."
"Oh."
Matthew nodded, a little disheartened. This was the first time the hacker was calling him, and he was hoping for some surprise. "It's something else." Bessy rubbed her temple and asked while logging into the software, "Something big has happened in Austria?"
"It hasn't been too peaceful, indeed."
Matthew was looking at himself in the mirror and shaving his mustache while speaking on the phone. He narrowed his eyes and asked,
"I haven't found the evidence of a crime at the manor, and the Underground Alliance is back. Have you heard?"
He remembered that B was very familiar with the Underground Alliance. "No." Bessy entered the account details and saw quite a bit of information about Mr. Rostron and Elijah. She sounded calm as usual.
"But the Underground Alliance is bringing in a new generation of people. The older members probably aren't involved,"
Matthew said as he put his shaver down. Bessy raised a brow. "New generation?"
"Yes, they're surely hoping not to get caught."
Matthew walked as he talked.
"Even if you hadn't contacted me today, I'd be contacting you soon. Help me keep an eye on this person on the wanted list. I'll send you the information later."
There were so many hackers at that level of notoriety, and they were able to disguise themselves as several different characters in the span of one day. Bessy acknowledged his request and then said, "Send me the list of the people recently sent to prison on your side."
"Sure."
Matthew didn't ask her why. Having worked together for so many years, they had a rapport. Then, he hung up the call. 2 minutes later, Bessy received a file on her fake account. She opened it. At 8 p.m., Michael, Alexander, and Sergeant Wilder returned to the villa in Austria. Rosemary, Christopher, and the rest were talking about them at the meeting table on the first floor. Michael saw Rosemary in a red dress the moment he entered. He didn't seem too shocked, but raised a brow and asked,
"Joshua let you come?"
"He was worried about you." Rosemary looked at the two people with him. She knew Alexander, but the other one seemed a little fierce and unapproachable. Rosemary couldn't help but feel a little taken aback by his presence. Before arriving in Austria, she really didn't know that Michael had so many capable people aiding him. "Miss Clark." Alexander greeted her and introduced Sergeant Wilder to her. Sergeant Wilder immediately greeted her politely when he heard that she was Michael's older sister. Michael walked to the table and sat down. Sergeant Wilder sat behind him and Christopher spoke first.
"Boss, we can't continue causing trouble with Matthew if he controls the movement at the landing area."
He was just about to mention contacting Daniel and getting him to resolve this. After all, Daniel was on good terms with Matthew. If they could resolve it calmly and privately, that would be best. Otherwise. But before he could even finish speaking, Michael looked up the stairs and cut him off.
"Let's not talk about this right now."
He got up and headed upstairs, leaving everyone downstairs in shock. Episode 404. Not at that level yet. Bessy was in her room upstairs. She'd spent last night settling some ICNE matters and barely slept at all. She hadn't rested while on the plane either. It was only after arriving in Austria that she relaxed a little. She'd always been a light sleeper. The knocking on the door wasn't loud, but she heard it. She got up to open it. Michael was at the door, leaning against the doorframe. "You're back already?" Bessy looked at the time on her watch. Christopher had made it sound as if he wouldn't be back so soon. Michael did not say a word. He simply grabbed her hand and went in. No one else came upstairs. Rosemary, Christopher, and the rest figured that this wasn't a good time. Downstairs, Sergeant Wilder still wasn't in the loop. "Mr. Clark, the boss." Christopher glanced at him and said deeply,
Miss Miller is here.
Sergeant Wilder's eyes lit up.
She is?
Christopher nodded.
That's good.
Sergeant Wilder finally seemed a little joyful.
Miss Miller will persuade the boss, right?
Upon hearing this, Christopher recalled Bessy's reaction last night. He hesitated before saying,
I guess so.
Alexander asked directly,
Miss Miller is here. Can I go up and look for her? I want to ask. You can.
Marvin looked at him expressionlessly.
If you're asking for it.
Alexander was speechless. He turned to Christopher and seemed to be asking with his eyes, What's with Marvin? Christopher did not respond. He went on to discuss the findings with Sergeant Wilder. Rosemary sat there and listened as there wasn't much she could input. A while later, they heard footsteps approaching. Michael had put both his hands in his pocket and was walking down the stairs behind Bessy. He scanned the meeting table and asked calmly,
Who informed her?
All of a sudden, everyone went quiet. Even Rosemary kept her head low. Christopher realized what was going on. Michael was asking who got Bessy to come. He stood up and said,
Boss, it was me.
Michael eyed him quietly and deeply, but his expression was unreadable. It's nothing to do with him. I came for something else. Bessy pulled out a stool and took a seat. I came to Austria to look for a research institute. Christopher, take a seat. Michael reached for a cigarette in his pocket and fiddled with it silently. Only Marvin was in the same state as before. He poured some warm tea and handed it to her.
Miss Miller, have some tea.
Rosemary, Alexander, and Sergeant Wilder looked at him in shock. Bessy took a sip and then turned to Michael. Michael immediately put away the cigarette, acting as if nothing had happened. Christopher took his seat. The atmosphere in the hall livened up. Marvin found Rosemary and everyone else staring at him.
What are all of you staring at me for?
Rosemary, Sergeant Wilder, and Alexander were speechless. Who knew Marvin was such a great actor? Michael walked over and asked,
What research are you on that requires you to come all the way to Austria?
He furrowed his brows. He was only getting 4 hours of sleep each night. Elijah is a part of it now, so he's taking half of my duties. Bessy placed the teacup back on the table. Michael had a good memory. He remembered this Elijah to be an ordinary man who wasn't especially impressive. He asked Christopher,
Is dinner ready?
Christopher nodded. He got up and told the kitchen crew to get ready to serve it. As everyone eased into the situation, Alexander continued the previous topic.
What should we do about Matthew? A small group of people from the law enforcement hall have been arrested by Matthew's men. Honestly, he has a hacker behind him that I dare not provoke.
Marvin was serving the dishes from the kitchen. Upon hearing that, he looked up at him.
Didn't you say you were amazing, but you dare not provoke this person, and you need Miss Miller's help with another?
Alexander said,
What do you know? Ask the Hacker Alliance. Matthew's hacker has even captured offenders in the Hacker Alliance itself, and I'm not even at that level yet.
At the same time, it was only 1 p.m. in Evanston. At Evanston's airport, 3 people got off the plane together and headed for a black car. Samuel's mother and grandfather were standing by the car. As the passenger approached, they bowed and greeted one of the people.
Great uncle.
The old man in the lead took his glasses off and nodded. He then asked,
Have you contacted my sister's descendants? What did they say? Will they meet me?
He sounded slightly nervous.
We're still contacting Mr. Miller.
Samuel was a little stunned.
The DNA report is conclusive. Mr. Miller is indeed your sister's biological son. I knew it.
The elderly man shook his head.
I've seen the photographs you sent. His eyes are just like my sister's.
I'm getting people to get in touch with him, but there hasn't been a reply yet.
Samuel's mother took them to a villa. The elderly man got out of the car and received a call. It was the person he'd sent to look for his sister's family.
Chairman, it's a little odd.
The person on the other end of the line sounded hesitant already.
Among the names you sent, the information of one of them is strange.
Episode 405. Giant crocodile is here.
Strange?
The elderly man, Mr. Hall, lifted his hand to signal to the Bright family members to head in. He remained outside the door and asked,
What's so strange about it?
His subordinates were looking at the data on their laptops.
We've managed to dig out information about most of them, but the information about your grandniece that was given to us by Miss Bright is different from what we found.
There was a pause from the voice before continuing.
Her personal and social information doesn't match, but the information provided by Miss Bright shouldn't be wrong.
This wasn't a rare occurrence in the hacking scene. If a hacker put in the effort to hide his or her identity, even Interpol couldn't find out. But they couldn't find anything about the information provided by Samuel's mother.
Give me the 2 sets of data,
Mr. Hall said as he walked indoors. Samuel's mother went to meet up with James after Mr. Hall was settled in. Mr. Hall started to look at the printed data. Some of the data was really specific, while some of it was vague. There was information about James, Bessy, Anne, and Tucker. The information about James and Anne was really specific. Everything about Anne was available. This included her examination results, her severing ties with James, and her getting kicked out of the National Violin Association. As for the information about Bessy and Tucker, there was not much information about them. It wasn't even included that Bessy was the top scorer in the final exams. However, the information provided by Samuel's mother was the complete opposite. She stated that she didn't know much about Anne. However, she had put in a lot of information about Bessy. She had elaborated on how great Bessy was. She wrote about her achievements of her being the final exam's top scorer, a famous arranger, and her work in the laboratory. Mr. Hall's subordinates couldn't find confirmation of anything that Samuel's mother had provided. Hence, they were confused. It was confusing indeed. Furthermore, Tucker's information was confusing as well. In Austria, Bessy was looking through the information that Matthew had sent her. One part of it was about a hacker that she was looking for, Gardner. He was the number 19 hacker in the Hacker Alliance. He had collaborated with a few terrorist groups for a bombing case a few weeks ago. He was successful in hijacking the surveillance cameras. He was in a class above Alexander. That was why she was looking for him. The Hacker Alliance was a free and easygoing organization. There were both good and bad hackers. They even had a dark web order sheet. Daniel had tried looking for a hacker on it previously. Some of them were harmless hackers, but others would do anything. Gardner was the latter case, but Matthew couldn't do anything about him. Matthew wouldn't have known how to handle this kind of situation previously. But now that he had Bessy, he had someone to depend on for such intellectual crimes. Even Christopher and Sergeant Wilder were aware of this. As everyone knew that Matthew had a hacker working for him, few had dared to cross him for the past 2 years. Bessy closed Gardner's information and opened up the latest information about Matthew's prison. Matthew had given her all of his information. It included all the personnel working daily and even included some of the drug lords as well. He guessed that Bessy was looking for someone. He even anticipated that she was looking for a powerful someone. Hence, he included those powerful people at the start of the list. Bessy looked through the list quickly. There was basically one person per page. It contained some basic information about the criminal and the crimes that they had committed. After 10 minutes of looking through, Bessy finally found the head security guard on the last page. The information on each of the drug lords had occupied an entire page. The head security guard and the other security guards group had a total of 10 people, but they were all on the same page. They were jailed, basically, because of a misunderstanding. Bessy leaned back in her chair as she thought about the matter. Michael didn't have a good relationship with Matthew and the Moss family. If she were to look for Matthew, he would try to take advantage of the situation. He'd have evidence of their diamond smuggling trade for a long while. Also, Christopher had mentioned it to her before that he wanted to go after Matthew this time. Hence, she couldn't involve herself. Or, it could get messy. She wasn't even sure if Matthew still remembered her. As she thought of it, Bessy picked up her phone. She then scrolled to Daniel and Giant Crocodile and forwarded the information about the head security guard to Giant Crocodile. Before she could give any instructions, she received a phone call. It was James. She picked up the phone as she stood up. As she got herself a glass of water, she asked, "What's the matter?"
"It's nothing."
James was still in the Park Place apartments. He was sitting on a sofa while Jack and Keith were staring at him. James then mentioned that Mrs. Bright had approached him previously.
"She claimed that Brian Hall was looking for me,"
James said. Bessy was shocked and exclaimed, "My great-uncle?" James nodded and continued, "May I meet?" "You can meet him if you want. It doesn't matter." Bessy answered nonchalantly as she put her glass of water on the table. She had never felt a sense of belonging to the Miller family. She had never even seen her grandparents, not even in photos. They exchanged a few more words before hanging up. On the other side of the call, Jack stopped frowning as he stared at James and asked,
"What was Miss Miller's opinion?"
The Miller family was having trouble, so Jack wanted to ask Bessy for help. Jack wasn't sure about Mr. Hall. This was mainly because the Bright family had approached them for this matter. Hence, he felt that there was a need to contact Bessy.
"Bessy is fine with anything,"
James replied as he put down the phone. Jack nodded as he took the phone and headed out. He then said,
"I'll tell this to Mrs. Bright and arrange for a meeting then."
On the other side of the phone call, Bessy hung up just as Giant Crocodile responded to her. He left her a message.
"Do you need me to get these people out? It won't be too much of a problem. I'll be in Austria tomorrow. I've heard from Clarissa that you're there as well."
Giant Crocodile's main stage wasn't in Austria, but he still had some connections there. He was aware of Rosemary's order. With Bessy's help, it wouldn't be much of a hassle, even though they were going against Matthew. He was mostly coming because he heard that Bessy was also in Austria. Previously, when Bessy showed herself, Giant Crocodile wanted to meet her, but didn't care to step foot in Evanston. But he didn't have much consideration when it came to Austria, and Bessy was there as well. Bessy started up the editor as she looked at his reply. She could tell that he wanted to meet up. She had known Giant Crocodile and his gang for about 5 to 6 years already. She'd known them longer than she knew Noah. Bessy finally picked up the phone after a long while and replied, "I'm near Matthew's building." After she finished replying, she started to type commands into her laptop. The light from the LCD of the laptop flashed on her face as she typed in the command. She found out Gardner's location based on the information Matthew gave. She encountered a Trojan in the process, so she checked its IP address as well. A familiar IP address appeared in front of her. Bessy recognized it as the one used by Alexander. No wonder Christopher had told her that Michael had been sabotaging Matthew's work. That was the reason Matthew couldn't figure it out. Gardner's security team was really strong. Alexander was also blocking his attempts in secret. Hence, it was expected that Matthew couldn't find anything. Bessy rubbed her temples, troubled. She then forwarded the data to Matthew. She leaned back, not understanding why Michael and Matthew were fighting each other. The next day they were having breakfast downstairs at 6:30 a.m. Bessy wasn't up due to jet lag. She had been so busy with the ICNE programs for the past few nights that she couldn't find the time to sleep. Also, she had been very busy with the laboratory's research for the past few months. Her body was about to give way. She fell into a deep sleep. Michael didn't allow anyone to wake her up. Marvin and Rosemary were still sleeping due to the jet lag as well.
Boss, are we not caring about the security guards?
Alexander asked Michael, who was sitting opposite him. Michael replied nonchalantly,
We need them to understand that Austria isn't such an easy place to enter.
The managers in the Clark family were tempted as they saw the White family benefited from their businesses in Austria. However, Austria was a dangerous place. A slight mistake would incur a huge cost. The White family had contacted the Moss family through Mr. Grint.
Boss, have you come clean with Joshua?
Christopher asked as he looked at him. Michael kept silent as he held his fork. Rosemary came downstairs. There were dark circles around her eyes, but she seemed excited. She exclaimed,
129 replied, The head security guard and the gang will be released in 3 days.
She sat down as she looked at her phone. Christopher was shocked by the news as he stared at her and said,
129 would normally end the task after providing some information. They are even releasing the head security guard now? This is too good to be true.
Rosemary made herself feel comfortable and said,
I feel that it wasn't hard for Giant Crocodile. He did it in a couple of minutes.
She could tell how powerful Matthew was in Austria. She could finally understand why Joshua was so fearful of 129. They could even interfere with the matters of powerful figures here in Austria. Michael ignored her. He put down his fork as he headed upstairs with his phone. His phone vibrated. He looked down at it. It was from General Taylor, from the hangar. He immediately picked up. General Taylor's English wasn't great, and he spoke awkwardly.
Boss, Giant Crocodile is here.
Episode 406. Giant Crocodile and Lone Wolf Meet. General Taylor stared at the aircraft parking ground and naturally paid close attention to his surroundings. Giant Crocodile had never been low-key. There were a few senior members in 129. Other than Giant Crocodile and Jared, most were mysterious. Only the genders of Morningbird and Slagdragon were known. They didn't know if Lone Wolf was a male or female. Giant Crocodile had always used the same nickname. Thus, everyone knew he was a weapon dealer, besides being a member of 129. Giant Crocodile was also different from the others as he held a grudge against Terry. They had fought over territory previously and even gotten Alexander involved. Alexander wanted some payback for the agony he had endured due to Giant Crocodile. Terry would be furious if he knew that Giant Crocodile had come to his territory. General Taylor knew about their grudge, even though Giant Crocodile had tried to keep it under wraps.
Giant Crocodile?
Michael walked to the end of the hallway on the second level. Seeing the vent, he wanted to smoke out of habit. However, he remembered that he had thrown the pack of cigarettes into the trash bin last night. Rosemary had told him about Giant Crocodile previously. Recalling this, Michael looked towards Bessy's room. Then, he smiled and said,
Find something for Matthew to do.
General Taylor understood Michael's intention. He hung up the phone and thought for a moment. He then turned to his subordinate and asked,
Where are Matthew's scouts? They are at the auction.
The subordinate immediately replied.
That's perfect,
General Taylor said as he put on his hat and coat.
Let's go to the auction.
Matthew couldn't find any traces of Alexander and the others, but he would get to do something about Giant Crocodile, who was a dangerous man and had just come to Austria. Bessy was awoken by the vibrations from her phone. Giant Crocodile had sent her a message the moment he arrived at the airport.
Bro, I've arrived in Austria. I should reach Matthew's building before 4.
Even though he was aware that Bessy was a lady, he couldn't help but address her as bro. Bessy got off the bed as she replied to him.
Okay.
She then proceeded to prepare to start her day. It was just past 7 in the morning. Bessy headed downstairs for breakfast. Rosemary was excitedly telling Marvin about giant crocodile's issues. As she noticed Bessy coming down, she said,
Bessy, you're finally awake?
Yes. Bessy sat down and replied, I'm thinking of heading over to Austria's association to visit my teacher. Previously, she had contacted Mr. Grint to help Zeke. She had always remembered that incident. She hadn't asked Zeke's purpose in contacting Mr. Grint, but when Mr. Rand had appeared, she could guess the gist of it.
If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten that Mr. Grint was in Austria as well.
Rosemary nodded and continued,
I think you should visit him, but you should rest for a couple more days. Even though you're young, you should still rest.
Bessy replied, I know.
Oh, right. I just received a reply from 129. The head security guard and the rest will be released in a couple of days.
Rosemary said. Bessy tapped on the table and replied smilingly, That's great. This was the amount of time she had given Giant Crocodile. She wasn't surprised at all. However, Rosemary was so caught up in the joyful news that she didn't realize it. She thought about the difference in time zones and continued,
It's still night back in the US. I'll call my dad later.
Bessy went upstairs after she was done with her meal. Christopher asked Marvin to do the dishes and followed her upstairs. Tell me, Bessy slowed down as she turned to look at him.
With regard to the Matthew incident,
Christopher said softly as he looked towards the study room.
Boss,
Bessy nodded in understanding. He breathed a sigh of relief and said,
Sorry to trouble you, Miss Miller.
It's not much of a problem. Bessy continued after she thought for a while. I'll be heading out in the afternoon.
You're heading out? Are you going to the Austria Association?
Christopher looked at her as he recalled that Bessy had said she wanted to meet her teacher. Bessy shook her head and replied, Just to meet a friend nearby. Do you know any place that would be suitable? I'd prefer it if there weren't many people around.
There is a coffee shop a few streets down. Their coffee is horrible, so there isn't much traffic.
Christopher immediately suggested, That would be perfect. Bessy replied smilingly, Send me the address.
I'll make the arrangement.
Christopher replied as he nodded. He intentionally did not ask what friend she was meeting. He was more concerned about who to send to take her to the meeting. Captain Baldwin wasn't in Austria. Marvin wasn't familiar with this place. Christopher headed downstairs as he sent the exact location to Bessy. When he reached downstairs, he noticed that Alexander was on the sofa staring at his laptop. He then called out to him,
Alexander, I need you to accompany Miss Miller on a trip later. It's somewhere nearby. All right,
Alexander replied as he continued to type on his keyboard.
I'm having some issues here. One of the hackers supporting Matthew destroyed my Trojan. The techniques are kind of familiar. The hacker supporting Matthew?
Christopher paused as he looked knowingly at him and asked,
He hasn't appeared in a while, right?
Alexander pushed his laptop aside, giving up. He then looked at Christopher and asked,
Who is Miss Miller meeting anyway? Isn't this place surrounded by Matthew's gang? If she's meeting Matthew, then wouldn't we be moths heading into the flame?
He meant it as a joke. Before Christopher could reply, Marvin came down wearing a pair of flip-flops. He picked up his breakfast and a glass of water from the kitchen and asked,
What friend?
Alexander continued with his work on the laptop as he didn't want to talk to him. Hence, Christopher had to reply to him.
Miss Miller is meeting a friend in the afternoon.
Marvin choked on the water and started coughing. Christopher was perplexed by Marvin's reaction. Marvin quietly cleaned up the water on the table and replied,
It's nothing. I was just reminded of something.
He was reminded of the type of friends Miss Miller had. Marvin roughly estimated her friends would have been released by now, right? Upstairs, Bessy sat in front of her computer as she opened up an image editing software. She then created an image based on the data that Elijah sent her. She also printed the documents the team had sent. Michael knocked on the door and entered. He had just settled the issues that Terry was facing. He approached her from the back and hugged her. He also brought over the documents that she had printed. He laid his chin on her shoulder as he glanced through the documents and asked,
When will you be done with this project?
February 20th, Bessy replied after thinking about it. The results would be released after February 20th. The Research Institute would be releasing their names on the list, and Principal White would be working with his successor. Hence, the Research Institute would be her main focus. Michael frowned and replied,
All right then.
He let go of her as he moved to staple the documents. He then casually asked,
I heard you're heading out later?
Yep, Bessy noticed the time. It was almost 5. Giant Crocodile should have arrived at the coffee shop already. She turned to look at Michael. Michael was sitting next to the table with one hand on the documents and the other on the staple. He was efficient in his operations. Do you want to come along? Bessy picked up her glass and asked. He was done the final set of documents. Michael handed the document to her, looked at her, smiled uncontrollably and said,
I can't accompany you today. Why don't you ask Alexander and Marvin instead? My sister is free as well.
It's fine. I was just asking for fun, Bessy replied. My friend isn't very social anyway. It was already 5:20. Giant Crocodile should be there by now. Alexander took Bessy by car to the coffee shop, with Marvin in the passenger seat. Michael stood at the door until he could no longer see the car. Then, his face turned cold. He turned, looked at Christopher, and said,
Bring him here.
Christopher headed downstairs. He then brought up a blonde guy from the basement and brought him to the study room. Christopher opened the door and a strong cigarette smell emerged from inside. Michael stood next to the window with his back to the door, emanating a cold aura. He wanted to make a video for Bessy. As he thought about it, Christopher brought the guy in front of Michael.
This guy worked for Matthew for a couple of years. He also belongs to the Underground Alliance.
Michael turned to look at the guy. As he was backlit, no one could tell his expression. He then said,
You have mentioned that Matthew was in the slumps 2 years ago?
The blonde guy kept his head down and answered laboriously,
I'm only aware that a guy was looking for him. He was from Austria as well.
He wasn't going to lie at this point. Michael put out the cigarette and remained expressionless. He was trying to piece together what had happened based on what this guy and Daniel had said. Daniel had found Bessy 2 years ago in the slums. There must have been other forces looking for her as well. Daniel was only a doctor and had just done what was necessary to find her in order to get her out safely. He was a really good doctor and had friends everywhere, but the only one he trusted was Matthew. Matthew had helped Daniel quite a bit previously. Hence, it must have been Matthew that helped Daniel previously as well. As he thought about it, Michael couldn't understand who Bessy had offended, that Daniel needed Matthew to help in the matter. He threw the cigarette butt into the bin and said impatiently,
Take him out. Send him back to Matthew. What are we going to do about the guy going against Matthew?
Christopher asked. Michael didn't look at him as he turned on his laptop. He then calmly said,
Remove all of them. Matthew's headquarters is having some problems with its cash flow and can't maintain their security system. Ask Alexander to check on it.
Christopher thought he had heard wrong and asked,
Boss?
Michael lifted his head and repeated himself.
Do it.
On the other side of town, Alexander parked across from the coffee shop.
Miss Miller, you can get out here. It's that coffee shop across the street.
Alexander continued.
Their coffee is really horrible. You can try to order their tea.
Yep, Bessy replied as she opened the door and got out of the car. She tidied up her coat and looked at the coffee shop. Marvin and Alexander weren't going to accompany her to meet her friend. After she got out of the car, Marvin fished out his phone to play a game. Alexander also took out his laptop as he glanced out of the car. Then, he suddenly froze.
What's the matter?
Marvin asked as he started playing. Alexander turned on his laptop as he frowned and replied,
I think I just saw one of Matthew's guys.
Then he realized that Matthew wouldn't have done something like that. Alexander looked back at his laptop. Bessy reached the coffee shop. No one knew who she was in Austria, so she wasn't trying to hide. Giant Crocodile had also arrived. He had positioned himself on the second floor, near the windows. Someone was sitting next to him, looking around for someone that looked remotely like Lone Wolf. He then asked nervously,
"Boss, is Lone Wolf coming? I don't see anyone that looks like him."
Everyone working for Giant Crocodile knew about Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf had helped them out of nowhere when they were in trouble. To them, Lone Wolf was almost as important as Giant Crocodile.
"It's almost time."
Giant Crocodile looked at his watch. It was 5:39 p.m. 1 more minute to their meeting time. He then looked towards the stairs. A slender figure appeared. Giant Crocodile immediately recognized Bessy. He quickly stood up and called out smilingly,
"Bro, over here!"
Episode 407. Bessy was captured by Matthew's men. Bessy didn't go over to Giant Crocodile immediately. She stood at the stairs for a short period while looking around. This coffee shop wasn't great, so only a few people were on the second level. Sensing that something was amiss, Giant Crocodile walked over and asked,
"Lone Wolf, is something wrong?"
Bessy continued standing at the stairs. She casually looked at him and said, "It's nothing. Does anyone know that you're here in Austria?"
"I haven't stopped at any other place other than the airfield."
Hearing her words, Giant Crocodile also started looking around.
"The service staff there."
He slowly put his hands in his pocket and touched his weapon. "Let's sit down." Bessy took off her coat, revealing a white sweater. Her tone was solemn. Both of them had experienced many storms in their lives. Hence, they didn't feel nervous even if they received stares. They walked to the table by the window while chatting. Seeing Giant Crocodile stand up, his trusted aide also stood up. He was disappointed to see Bessy, but he didn't let his expressions show it. Giant Crocodile introduced him.
"This is Lynn O'Malley."
Lynn stood up and looked at Bessy respectfully. He wanted to speak, but did not know how to address her. Bessy sat opposite them. She placed the coffee cup aside and started using her cell phone. Her phone instantly lit up. She projected a keyboard on the white table. Bessy typed a series of numbers. Her eyelashes drooped slightly, covering her eyes. Without lifting her head, she said calmly, "Bessy Miller." Lynn immediately understood that this was Lone Wolf's name.
"Miss Miller."
"Yes," Bessy responded. Giant Crocodile leaned back in his chair. While looking around, he asked,
"How old were you when you first took an order?"
A series of codes appeared on Bessy's cell phone screen. 14. Although he had heard this from Clarissa and Slagdragon, he was still shocked and remained silent.
"When I was 14, my uncle threw me to the wolves. I thought I was very impressive back then."
Who knew that someone else at 14 years old could be more awesome than him? Giant Crocodile was different from Clarissa. He had joined 129 solely because of Bessy. Before 129 was established, the Hacker Alliance did not accept Giant Crocodile's application. Hence, he had tried to apply through 129. He didn't expect to be assigned a hacker who successfully hacked all the surveillance cameras. If not for that, Matthew might have imprisoned him. Giant Crocodile deeply remembered this incident. Of course, the public didn't know that the arrogant big boss Giant Crocodile in America had gotten into trouble multiple times, and Lone Wolf helped him clear some obstacles. He was lured into 129 by Jared using Lone Wolf's name. Lynn coughed and turned pale as he was drinking his coffee. Bessy looked at him with her eyebrow raised. Lynn hurriedly put down his cup. While coughing, he said,
"Not you, Miss Miller. This coffee tastes bad. I'll give you a bit of tea."
Giant Crocodile pushed a glass of tea towards Bessy while holding on to a cup of plain water. He then continued looking around. The projected keyboard was very small. Bessy typed and reached for the cup of tea.
"We have no control over these surveillance cameras. No bugs as well.
Giant Crocodile stopped looking around and relaxed. Although they didn't keep in touch, they knew what to do. Giant Crocodile and Lynn were immersed in Lone Wolf's actions and were confident they wouldn't be noticed. They didn't suspect that they had been tracked by General Taylor since they arrived and did not sense that they were being watched.
This is Matthew's territory. Some of his men might be around.
Giant Crocodile frowned.
He shouldn't find out about me.
His main training ground wasn't Austria. Although he had grudges against Matthew wouldn't spend many resources to spy on him. It might be more likely that Terry would spy on him. You two can leave first. Bessy placed her phone aside. The coding had been processed and was only missing the last action. She was waiting for Giant Crocodile to leave. Giant Crocodile nodded and leaned back in his chair with a casual expression.
You're always situated in Evanston. When will you come to see me?
We'll have to see the situation. Bessy squeezed her wrist.
I thought you enjoyed chaotic places.
Giant Crocodile rested both his hands on the table. The two were close enough that he knew Bessy frequented poorer or chaotic places. She glanced at him. My job requires me to. Lynn sat beside the two of them drinking the tasteless coffee. Looking around the second level, he didn't sense that something was amiss, as there were only two other service staff around. Bessy and Giant Crocodile knew he was wrong. However, they could still chat knowing that they were being watched. He guessed that only they could pull it off. The two chatted a bit more. Giant Crocodile finally made up for the past year when he did not meet Lone Wolf. Bessy reached for her phone on the table. 15 minutes had passed. You two leave first. Be secretive. She removed her jacket and held it casually. Regarding that order, I've asked someone to settle it. Lynn and Giant Crocodile stood up. At that time, Bessy pressed the Enter key on her phone's keyboard. Giant Crocodile and Lynn had already headed downstairs. Concurrently, in the surveillance room, all 36 cameras stopped working. A group of people frantically pressed on their headsets.
Sir, the surveillance cameras stopped working.
In the coffee shop, Bessy was calm. She sat on her chair with her legs propped up. She put her phone back together and opened Twitter. Clicking on Daniel's chat window, she sent a message. Remember to find Matthew for me. She sent another message to Marvin. I'm heading somewhere with my friend. Wait. After sending the messages, Bessy headed downstairs, but the person wasn't there yet. Someone else was heading up the stairs. It was Rosemary.
Bessy, Alexander said you were here.
Rosemary patted her sleeves.
Someone bumped into me while heading down the stairs. Where are your friends?
They left. Bessy found a chair for Rosemary to sit in. Rosemary sat down opposite her. She signaled for the service staff to order a cup of coffee.
Michael told me to come and find you. He seems to be in a bad mood today.
Bad mood? Bessy raised her brows. He had seemed fine when she left. The coffee here was served very quickly. The service staff served 2 cups of coffee. Bessy took a sip. The coffee was burnt and bitter. The cup was small in addition to the coffee being horrible. Rosemary also took a sip. She narrowed her eyes and said,
This only happened once previously. The first time, he fixed my antique pottery horse and was in a good mood the entire day. He wanted to surprise my father, so he only gave me the fixed pottery horse the next day. His expression wasn't any different, but...
Rosemary shook her head. She couldn't continue her sentence. It was from then on that Michael became lazy and hardly focused on anything. All these years, Rosemary could see that he had worked the hardest for Bessy's matters. Bessy froze. She couldn't figure out why he was acting like this. At this time, Matthew's men appeared in front of them. They were fully armed, but they only saw 2 ladies casually drinking coffee. The group of men exchanged glances, but still quietly took Rosemary and Bessy away. Bessy was determined not to worry Marvin and Alexander today. Marvin would have believed Bessy's message. Christopher had reminded Bessy many times as he brought her here. Although he didn't feel that she needed their protection, he didn't slack off, as this was Matthew's territory. Across the road, Alexander looked at his computer and noticed some commotion in the coffee shop. He saw Matthew's men.
Something's wrong.
Alexander saw Bessy's message to Marvin. He put down his computer and said,
Let's check it out.
They immediately went up to the second level of the coffee shop. There was no one by the window. At the same time, on the street, Rosemary grabbed Bessy's arm. Her head was immediately filled with thoughts. These men were fully armed. Could they be the ones that captured the head security guard? She withdrew her gaze as Bessy looked at her. Rosemary, don't worry. Everything's fine. Bessy's words calmed her down.
Bessy, do you know who they are?
Yes. Bessy put her hands in her pockets and then casually threw a bomb at Rosemary. Matthew's men. Episode 408. Matthew, let's talk. Bessy didn't pay much attention to Rosemary after responding. She was thinking about what would happen next. Once she entered the cafe, Bessy knew that Giant Crocodile's arrival had been disclosed by Michael. He had set up a trap for Matthew. Matthew didn't have control over the airport parking grounds, and Giant Crocodile was careful. Hence, it could only be Michael who guessed who she was meeting. She hadn't come clean to Michael about Giant Crocodile and Matthew's grudge. There were many conflicts of interest. Giant Crocodile and Terry did not see eye to eye, so Michael would have supported Terry. She couldn't influence Austria's forces on her own, and things would get even more complicated. Michael would give in because of her. But what about his men? What about Matthew and Giant Crocodile's men? As a leader and boss, how could they give in because of her? It was trivial and disloyal. Bessy didn't feel like she was so important. She didn't want Michael to do such a thing. Thinking of this, Bessy frowned. Fortunately, she had fled from Austria, but she left some traces. Daniel flushed her number and she erased her records. However, they could be found if someone wanted to. How could she be more sincere? Bessy was thinking about how to confess to Michael about Giant Crocodile and Matthew. Rosemary couldn't calm down. She turned to look at Bessy. Her face was frozen. She sensed that something was amiss about the person who took them away. Bessy's first reply had calmed her down, but her second reply made her extremely anxious.
Bessy.
Rosemary looked at Bessy with a blank expression.
What did you say just now?
Bessy was still thinking about how to confess. She repeated, Rosemary, these are Matthew's men. Her voice was calm. How can you be so calm? Rosemary thought. Rosemary took a deep breath. She felt that Bessy might not know Matthew's status in Austria, and she was engrossed in research.
Bessy, listen to me. Did you contact Alexander and Marvin?
She took out her phone while she was speaking. They had not taken away their phones. I contacted them long ago. Don't worry. Bessy could sense Rosemary's fear and turned her head to comfort her. They were nearing Matthew's building. As they talked, they arrived at the building. Bessy was too casual and Rosemary didn't look dangerous, as they were females and did not have any weapons. They were brought into an interrogation room with an iron door and single-sided glass. The iron door had a magnetic card lock. The men left after taking them in. The interrogation room had 2 chairs. Bessy kicked out a chair and said, Rosemary, you can take a seat first. Rosemary was no longer anxious as she realized why Bessy was so calm. They hadn't broken any laws in Austria. Matthew was from the Interpol and thus couldn't do as he pleased. Calm, she said. I'm not tired. You can take a seat instead. I'll talk to anyone that comes later. Seeing that Rosemary had no intention to sit, she sat down and took out her phone. There was no signal in the interrogation room, so Bessy started gaming for a while. Rosemary stayed strong and looked at Bessy playing her game. Their will couldn't easily be swayed now. On the other side of the single-sided glass, a group of people stared at Bessy playing her game leisurely. They took off their headsets and asked, "Is the chief back?" At first, they suspected that these two were ordinary people. They thought that they were inexplicably locked here without any reason. However, seeing how calm they were, it seemed they weren't that simple. Ordinary people wouldn't act like this. Their headsets sounded. One of them immediately picked it up and replied, "Yes." He then stood up and said, "The chief is back." Two men rushed outside and met Matthew in the lift.
"Boss, these two women must know about giant crocodiles' whereabouts."
Matthew was furious. He narrowed his eyes and dialed a number. For a while, he listened to someone on the other end, and then said,
"No, I cannot let them go immediately. She knows about giant crocodile."
It was Daniel he was talking to. He was in the laboratory holding on to a report. Hearing this, he slammed the report onto the table.
"Did you forget how I rescued you from the pile of dead bodies?"
Matthew's tone remained still.
"Don't worry, I won't do anything to her. But before I find giant crocodile, I won't release any of them. This is a matter of principle."
Matthew hung up the call. He owed his life to Daniel. However, he couldn't release them just because of Daniel. In a laboratory in Evanston, Daniel stared at his phone with a dazed expression. Robert was observing a petri dish. He turned his head to look at him.
"Are you okay?"
"No." Daniel shook his head.
"What's Bessy's relationship with giant crocodile?"
He lowered his head and looked for Michael's number. He trusted that Matthew wouldn't mess with Bessy. He had to inform Michael. Daniel had seen Matthew's wanted list. Michael was one of the people on it. Robert looked at him. Frowning, he said,
"No wonder Evanston is so peaceful and we haven't received any news."
Bessy and Michael must have left Evanston. In Austria, at Matthew's building, Matthew swiped his card and entered the room. His gaze alternated between Bessy and Rosemary. His attention was fixed on Bessy for a longer time. Matthew had a strong aura, so Rosemary's calm mind was slightly disrupted. Matthew realized that she was nervous. He pointed to Bessy and said,
"Take her out."
This meant that he wanted to speak to Rosemary alone. Bessy finished her game and placed her phone on the table. She casually leaned back in the chair and met his gaze. "Wait, let's talk first." Episode 409. A Shocking Identity Revelation. Rosemary held on to Bessy's arm and said, "No." "Take her out first," Bessy said as she crossed her arms. Matthew glanced at her. After pondering for a few moments, he signaled to his subordinates to escort Rosemary out. The door closed with a bang. Matthew sat opposite Bessy as he held on to her information. He took a quick look at it before putting it aside. He then asked,
"You wish to discuss with me regarding Daniel? Tell you what, I will release you after you tell me everything you know about giant crocodile."
Matthew knew that Bessy must be really close to Daniel for her to be able to contact him in such a short time. She must be quite up to date about the situation in Austria. "Let's not talk about Daniel. Let's talk about you instead," Bessy replied smilingly. Matthew had one of his hands on the table and the other on the armrest. He then replied,
"Let's talk about me then,"
Bessy replied after looking at him. "Did you shave recently?" Matthew hesitatingly replied.
"Yes."
Bessy nodded as she confirmed that the person in front of her was Matthew. "Turn off the surveillance camera." Matthew glanced at her and turned off the surveillance camera. 4 years ago, you and your gang were getting hunted by the assassins from the Underground Alliance in another country. Daniel saved you afterward, along with 200 refugees. Bessy spoke nonchalantly after she saw that the surveillance camera was off. Have you given a thought about who leaked your information? Matthew clenched his fist as he suddenly raised his head. Bessy was still in the same posture, looking at him casually.
It was you.
Matthew looked at her fearfully. I understand that you want to look for Giant Crocodile, but neither Rosemary nor I am aware of his exact location. Bessy was being truthful. Giant Crocodile was famous for being secretive. The reason Rosemary was involved was that Giant Crocodile accepted her application that she submitted to 129. Furthermore, it's unrealistic that you would want to capture him. I would advise against it. Think about it. Isn't there anything strange about the information that you received about Giant Crocodile today? Bessy stopped smiling as she stood up. She then asked, Can we leave now? Matthew stared at her for a moment before nodding. He took a long look at her before turning on the mic and saying,
Open the door and let them out.
The subordinates opened the door. Bessy immediately left. Rosemary was escorted from the neighboring room. When she reunited with Bessy, she examined her carefully and asked,
Bessy, are you all right?
I'm fine, Bessy replied. She looked at her and smilingly said, Rosemary, let's go back.
Bessy, how did you convince them?
Rosemary couldn't believe that Matthew had decided to let them go just like that.
They looked as though they weren't letting us go so easily.
Bessy replied nonchalantly, They got the wrong person.
They got the wrong person?
Rosemary replied doubtfully, but... However, as Bessy sounded sincere in her answer, Rosemary believed her. At the same time, at the temporary location where Michael was staying, Christopher, Alexander, and the gang were having a somber meeting on the first floor. Michael was in a bad mood. Both Sergeant Wilder and Sergeant Dillard were there, frowning.
If Matthew caught them, he will have gotten their identity. He won't let them go just like that.
Matthew had been searching for Michael's vulnerabilities for a long time. Marvin and Alexander didn't dare to sit down as they lowered their heads in shame. Alexander then said,
It must be my fault. Matthew found out because of me.
Christopher also felt guilty.
It's my fault. I suggested the place to Miss Miller. Boss, let me go contact Matthew instead.
Michael stood up as he looked at the door coldly and said,
No need for that. Stay here. I'll contact Matthew instead.
The angrier he got, the calmer he sounded. He picked up the car keys and started to head out. When he was a distance away from the door, he stopped in his tracks and stared out. The rest also looked out. A few moments later, Marvin exclaimed,
Miss Miller and Miss Clark are back.
As he finished speaking, the door was opened. Bessy and Rosemary were talking joyfully. Bessy had one of her hands in her pocket as she walked. When she noticed the group staring at them, she asked, What are you all standing here for?
What?
Alexander was agitated as he exclaimed unbelievably,
Miss Miller, you two are fine?
What could happen to us? Bessy snapped as she tidied her sleeves.
Weren't you captured by Matthew?
Christopher asked as he approached. Their intelligence had reported that they were captured. Rosemary replied calmly,
They made a mistake. They apologized on the way back.
Marvin and Alexander stared at each other in disbelief. They apologized? Was this something that Matthew would have done? Bessy didn't join in the conversation, but stood facing Michael. She then replied, Let's have a chat upstairs. Rosemary was busy thinking of other problems. Michael was affected by the previous incidents involving Bessy, even though Daniel had promised him that nothing would happen to them. He was still trying to calm down. However, Bessy appeared to feel guilty. Michael noticed it, but replied nonchalantly,
Let's go then.
He slanted his body to give way to her. Her mind raced as she walked towards the study room. She entered the study room and Michael came in behind her, closing the door. Bessy looked at him and confessed, "I went to meet Giant Crocodile today." Michael was shocked, but continued staring at her. The first part of the confession was always the hardest. Bessy continued, "Actually, when Terry faced off against Giant Crocodile, I secretly helped him. Oh, I'm also the hacker who has been helping Matthew all along." Episode 410. That's right. I'm B. Last night when Alexander was obstructing Matthew, I took Alexander off the site. Bessy looked up at the ceiling, finding it hard to go on. But I'm not that close to Matthew. At this point, Bessy paused for a moment and then looked over at him. He just sort of saved my life 2.5 years ago. Michael hadn't looked into this in detail. Bessy guessed that he might not have calmed down after what Rosemary had said. When he calmed down, he would be able to figure out what exactly had happened. Before, he had also managed to guess that she was the person helping Daniel, even with so little information on hand. Now that there was so much information on this, it would be even easier for him to conclude. But Bessy was still thinking of something else. How was she going to explain 2.5 years' worth of happenings to him? She furrowed her brows and recalled the scene Daniel had described 2.5 years back. It sounded pretty bad. Bessy sighed. That was why confessing was such a messy matter. It was so tough for her to get out of it, and she really didn't want anything to do with the past anymore. She hadn't even told Daniel everything that had happened. However, she didn't expect that it would be Michael who wouldn't stop talking about what had happened 2.5 years ago. Nor did she expect that her friend, a friend she'd gone through life and death incidents with, would betray her a year ago over some money, and didn't even have the guts to tell her about it afterward. Michael dragged a chair over and got her to sit first, before looking straight at her.
The hacker behind Matthew even got into the Hacker Alliance to look for a member inside. I don't understand the hacking world, but you don't think it's the president of the Hacker Alliance who's free to leave and enter the group?
No. Bessy folded her arms and looked at him. Haven't all of you already guessed it? Her attitude. Michael recalled that Alexander had been so sure that the hacker behind Matthew was B. All things aside, this B. Michael was very calm. It had seemed like nothing that Bessy said would shake him, but he was starting to lose it now. He knew that Bessy was good at hacking, but he had never associated her with B before. What was most crucial was that the president of the Hacker Alliance said that Bessy was almost as good as him. And he was 65 years old, and Hacker B was as famous as him. Even if Michael had confidence in her skills, he would never expect Hacker B's age to be that of someone who could pass as the president's granddaughter. Michael looked at Bessy for a long while before shaking his head.
You know that the president isn't going to continue looking for you.
Bessy did not answer his question. Instead, she asked, "Do you know the president?" Back when they were in Chicago, Bessy had asked Officer Gomez about this. She mentioned that Michael had already guessed that she might be a rather competent hacker, as he'd identified the cell phone in the technician's hand. The technician mentioned that he had only met the president of the Hacker Alliance once. Bessy suspected that Michael was the president's friend that the technician was referring to, but she couldn't find evidence of it. But as she heard what he said now, Bessy was more or less certain. Michael was the friend that the president of the Hacker Alliance had invited at that time. It wasn't exactly a complicated matter, actually. Michael and the president were both in Austria. In terms of wealth, no one in Austria was comparable to Michael.
Somewhat.
Michael leaned against the table slightly and concealed his shock.
I even helped him before with some funds.
He was about to continue when his cell phone rang. He looked down at it and saw that it was a private number. Michael narrowed his eyes but did not pick up immediately. He was still thinking about Bessy and the hacker business. The confession was pretty much done. Bessy felt that she needed some time to cool down first. She got up and pointed to his cell phone. You can take it. I'll go downstairs with Marvin and the others. With that, Bessy turned around to leave, but Michael grabbed her waist. He pulled her back and put an arm around her waist.
You're leaving? Just like that?
His cell phone rang again. Pick it up. I'll go downstairs for now. Bessy took a step back and cleared her throat. She then turned around and left the room. She closed the door and Michael eyed his phone for a while before picking it up. He was looking in the direction of the door as he received the call.
Mr. Hall, you're looking for me?
It was Brandon Hall on the other end, the president of the Hacker Alliance.
You said you were based in Evanston.
Brandon smiled as he said,
I happen to be in Evanston now. We can meet when you're free. It's been over 2 years since I saw you.
Michael straightened up.
Mr. Hall, what bad timing. I happen to be in Austria right now. I might be going back in the next few days, but not now.
Mr. Hall chuckled.
It's all right. I'll be in Evanston for quite a while. I might even spend the new year here. So I'll definitely be available when you're back.
Haven't you been urgently looking for someone to take over the Hacker Alliance?
Michael got up and paced around.
You got the time to travel?
Michael thought about why someone from the Hacker Alliance would be in Evanston, but he couldn't think of a reason.
It's not urgent. I've found my sister's descendants, and they're in Evanston. I'm currently waiting for her son.
Brandon looked towards the door as he tried to suppress his excitement, but failed.
I'm calling you now just to share the good news. If my sister has a child or grandchild who's gifted enough to take over the Alliance, I won't have to fret anymore.
Of course, Brandon did not really mean it that way. He wasn't really thinking he could find someone for the Alliance so much as he was sharing his joy. He had seen most of his sister's descendants. Besides the daughter who wanted to sever ties with his sister's son, he had seen all of their photos and videos before. None of them were known in the hacking field.